Imagine this. Shopping malls deserted, hotel lobbies echoing with emptiness, and highways, once jammed with trucks, now eerily quiet. It feels like something's draining the lifeblood from entire states, but it's not war. It's not even a recession. It's something far more unexpected, a targeted Canadian boycott. And it's hitting with surgical accuracy. Sounds dramatic? It's not speculation, it's reality. 6 U.S. states are feeling the squeeze hard. Canadian tourists have stopped coming, trade deals are evaporating, and the numbers? They're brutal. Economies that once thrived on cross-border commerce are starting to crack. Stick with this, because what you're about to hear might completely change how you view your state's economic future. Number 6. Arizona. Picture this. Those iconic Arizona sunsets still paint the sky, the desert air still hums with silence, but there's a different kind of quiet creeping in. RV parks, half empty, restaurants closing early, small towns asking the same question, where did everyone go? Here's the reality. Arizona didn't just attract tourists. It built an entire seasonal economy around Canadians. At its peak, nearly 1 million Canadians came here in a single year. They didn't just pass through, they stayed, spent, and supported. Golf courses, rentals, diners, even local clinics thrived thanks to that snowbird dollar. Last year alone, Canadian visitors pumped over $775 million into Arizona's economy. But this year, that flow has nearly stopped. Flights from Canada are down more than 70% compared to last spring. And with the boycott gaining traction, this isn't a slump, it's a collapse. So ask yourself, what happens when a state quietly builds its local economy around out-of-country visitors? And then those visitors vanish. Just look at Yuma, Dale, and Apache Junction. They're already feeling the heat. Spring seasons have been the slowest in over a decade. RV parks are reporting less than half their normal bookings. Clinics that cater to long-term winter guests, laying off staff or closing early just to survive. And here's what most people overlook. This isn't just about tourism. It's a domino effect. Fewer Canadians means fewer customers. Fewer customers lead to layoffs. Layoffs/local spending. That trickles down into lower income tax, sales tax, and city revenue. Arizona's economy leans heavily on tourism, nearly 10% of it. Even a short-term freeze in Canadian dollars could gut hundreds of millions from local budgets. And in rural counties, there is no plan B. Now, hit that subscribe button before we dive into the next state, because what's coming next is even closer to the brink. These shifts aren't just stories, they're red flags. But wait, Arizona's crisis isn't only about this year. There's a deeper warning here. This is one of the fastest-growing states in America, but that growth rides on stability. If the retirees stop showing up, if the housing market cools, if seasonal businesses go under, that momentum grinds to a halt. And that's already happening. In snowbird towns, local tax revenue is drying up. City councils are quietly freezing budgets. Tourism boards are in overdrive, trying to patch the hole. But the truth is, there's no replacement in sight. So here's the bottom line. If this boycott rolls into next winter, Arizona won't just face a bad season. It'll face its worst tourism crisis since 2008. And for a state powered by sunshine and snowbirds, this kind of hit isn't just seasonal, it's structural. Number 5, Florida. Sunshine, palm trees, packed beaches. That's the Florida we all picture, right? But take a closer look and the picture changes. Hotel lobbies, strangely quiet. Beach rentals, sitting empty. Small towns, holding their breath. Because here's the truth. Florida isn't just a vacation destination. It's an economic engine fueled by tourism. And at the heart of that engine, Canadians. Over 3 million Canadians visited last year alone, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into cities like Naples, Fort Lauderdale, and Orlando. Snowbirds didn't just bring sunscreen, they brought spending power. Real estate, restaurants, local clinics, small shops, entire businesses were built around their seasonal return. But in 2025, the story flipped. Flights from Canada have plummeted by over 70%. Bookings? Collapsing. The familiar snowbirds? Staying home. And now, The ripple effects are turning into shockwaves. Businesses that once thrived off winter Canadian traffic are bleeding. In tourist-heavy counties, where tax revenue lives and dies by out-of-towners, local governments are bracing. Budget cuts, service freezes, postponed infrastructure. It's already starting. And here's the scary part. If this boycott continues, Florida could be staring down the worst financial storm since the Great Recession. That's not a stretch, it's math, because when your economy depends on visitors and those visitors stop coming, the slowdown isn't gradual. It's suffocating. From Miami condos to panhandle motels, the pulse of Florida's economy is fading, and no one knows how long the silence will last. Number 4, Illinois. From a distance, Illinois still shines. The Chicago skyline glows at night, highways hum with movement, and it all feels like a symbol of solid American industry. Finance, railroads, agriculture, all firing on familiar cylinders. But take a few steps closer and a different story starts to unfold. Here's what most people miss. Illinois isn't just bordered by Canada, it's deeply tied to it. We're talking about billions in trade, tightly wound supply chains, and decades of cross-border business relationships. In fact, Canada is Illinois' #1 export market, accounting for over 25% of the state's foreign trade. That's more than $16 billion USD in goods heading north, until now. Because in 2025, Canadian demand is starting to dip, and that drop is quietly shaking Illinois at its core. Let's start with manufacturing. Illinois produces everything from heavy machinery and electronics to processed foods, industries that have long depended on Canadian buyers. For years, places like Peoria, Decatur, and Rockford were built on the strength of those orders. Now, those orders are disappearing. A recent report shows exports to Canada from Illinois have dropped nearly 11% this year. And this isn't just a bad quarter, it's a trend. Canadian businesses are voicing concerns over trade instability, and some are pulling back completely. Others are subtly sidestepping, rerouting contracts through less politically tense U.S. states. But the cracks run deeper. Agriculture is another pillar. Illinois ranks second in the U.S. for corn production, and it's a major player in soybeans and meat processing. Canada has historically been a major buyer, especially for animal feed and packaged food. Now, Canadian distributors are turning to Europe, South America, even local alternatives. As a result, Illinois' food exports to Canada have dropped over 13%. And the impact? It's everywhere. In farm towns like Bloomington Normal and Quincy, grain elevators are half full. Processing plants are scaling back. Trucking and rail companies are seeing fewer shipments. Even the Port of Chicago, a key gateway for goods headed to Ontario and Quebec, has seen a steep drop in container traffic. But here's what makes this even more concerning. It's not just about economics anymore. It's about confidence. Businesses are starting to second-guess their forecasts. Hiring is slowing. Small companies that once depended on Canadian contracts are laying off staff. And for cities already struggling, like Springfield and East St. Louis, falling tax revenues are hitting just as costs are rising. Illinois was already in recovery mode from the pandemic, but this quiet pullback from Canada, it threatens to undo that progress. This isn't a loud collapse, it's a slow bleed. One contract canceled, one truck rerouted, one loading dock left empty at a time. And if this boycott continues, the state may not just lose trade. It could lose a sense of economic certainty that took decades to build. So the question is, how long before this silent retreat turns into a full-scale exit? Number 3. Michigan. The snow still crunches under boots. Factories still buzz. And on the surface, Michigan looks solid, rooted in steel, engines, and that signature Rust Belt resilience. But listen a little closer, and you'll hear it. Not the sound of industry, but of hesitation. The kind that makes business leaders hold off on expansion, that makes border towns feel suddenly distant, that has entire industries asking, is this the beginning of something much bigger? See, Michigan and Canada aren't just neighbors. They're economic partners joined at the hip. Michigan exports more goods to Canada than to any other country by a wide margin, over $27 billion a year. That's cars, auto parts, raw materials, farm goods. A massive share of the state's economy moves through that northern border. But here in 2025, that flow, it's faltering. Why? A growing Canadian boycott is quietly gaining traction. It's fueled by a mix of political friction, trade disputes, and a rise in economic nationalism north of the border. And the impact is already visible. Cross-border trade is down over 12% just this year, and that's not a seasonal dip, it's a shift. And in Michigan, 180,000 jobs are directly tied to Canadian business. Places like Port Huron and Sault Ste. Marie, where Canadian dollars once felt like a second currency, are hurting. Gift shops, diners, local pharmacies, all are reporting sharp drops in Canadian traffic and sales. But the damage isn't limited to tourism. Canadian manufacturers are rethinking their supply chains, pulling back from Michigan suppliers. That means paused contracts, shelved projects, and hiring freezes, a ripple effect that hits hard across the state. And at the center of this storm, Detroit. Detroit's slow but inspiring comeback has relied heavily on deep trade with Canadian auto plants, part suppliers, and investors. But now that connection is starting to weaken, and the city's fragile recovery is suddenly exposed. Automakers are scrambling to diversify supply chains, but shifts like that take time and come with pain. Here's the deeper issue. Michigan's economy runs on trust. Trust that the border stays open, that contracts stay honored, that cross-border relationships stay steady. And right now, that trust is unraveling. Layer on rising costs, labor shortages, and a still recovering housing market, and even Michigan's urban strongholds like Lansing and Grand Rapids are starting to feel uneasy. Manufacturers there are flagging concerns on investor calls. Some report delays in Canadian parts. Others are quietly relocating operations south, trying to reduce border risk. And in the north of the state, where the economy leans heavily on Canadian tourism, fishing, and summer travel, things are getting dire. Bookings are down 40%, marinas are half empty, cottages sit idle. Even fuel sales at border gas stations have dipped dramatically. It's not a dramatic collapse. It's a slow-motion unraveling, quiet, creeping, but very real. So here's the question. What if this isn't temporary? What if it's not a phase, but a full pivot? Michigan may not fall overnight, but for a state this deeply tied to a cooling neighbor, the early cracks are already there, and they're only getting wider. Number 2, Minnesota. The lakes are still. Minneapolis glows against the waterline. On the surface, Minnesota looks calm, strong, steady, quietly successful. But under that glassy calm, a storm is building, and it's moving faster than most realize. Minnesota has long taken pride in its balanced economy, from global healthcare giants and innovative tech startups to rich farmland and manufacturing powerhouses. It's a state that runs on resilience and reliable trade, especially with one key partner, Canada. But in 2025, that partnership is under pressure like never before, and the effects? They're starting to ripple through towns and industries that never saw it coming. Here's the tough truth. Canada is Minnesota's biggest international trade partner. In 2024 alone, the state traded over $11 billion USD in goods with its northern neighbor. That includes everything from medical devices and high-tech machinery to soybeans, wheat, and pork. For decades, these goods have flowed north to Canadian companies, retailers, and supply chains. But this year, that flow is slowing, and behind the numbers is something deeper, a quiet shift in confidence. Canadian buyers are scaling back. Some are reducing orders, others are canceling contracts altogether. There's no headline announcement, no press release, just a silent, deliberate pullback. And many experts are calling it what it is, a slow-moving economic boycott triggered by rising tensions in politics, trade, and public sentiment. The hardest hit so far? Minnesota's manufacturing sector. In cities like Rochester, Duluth, and St. Cloud, factory floors are slowing down. Some companies are cutting back to part-time shifts, others are freezing hiring or delaying expansions. For small, highly specialized manufacturers, especially those serving Canadian clients, it's already becoming a fight for survival. Here's what most people don't realize. Minnesota is one of the most export-dependent states in the U.S. Roughly 1 in 6 jobs in Minnesota is tied to global trade, and nearly 40% of that trade, it goes to Canada. So even a 10% dip in orders doesn't just mean a tough quarter. It can mean layoffs, missed payroll, and canceled contracts. And farmers? They're feeling the squeeze too. Minnesota's agricultural exports to Canada have fallen nearly 9% this year. Grain elevators are sitting on stockpiles, pork processors are rerouting shipments, often at a loss, just to keep supply chains moving. When you're working with razor-thin margins, even a minor disruption can hit like a hammer, and the shockwaves are already traveling across rural counties. Logistics hubs are also feeling it. At the port of Duluth, one of the state's most important trade arteries, shipments northbound to Ontario and Manitoba are drying up. Truck and rail traffic crossing the border is down. Every lighter load means fewer hours for drivers, less fuel sold, less tax collected. And yet, most Minnesotans haven't fully caught on. Not yet. But in small towns, you can hear the early questions. Why are things slower this year? Why is the plant only running 3 days a week? Why is the budget suddenly tighter? It's not panic, not yet. But it's becoming impossible to ignore. This isn't a collapse. It's not loud. It's erosion. A slow, steady wearing down of the economic bedrock Minnesota has relied on for decades. And if this Canadian boycott stretches on, if trust between cross-border partners keeps unraveling, Minnesota might not just face a downturn. It could face something far more dangerous. A silent recession. The kind that creeps in, quietly disrupts everything, and leaves communities struggling to understand what went wrong, until it's already too late. If that hit closer to home than you expected, now's the time to act. Like, share, subscribe, because the more people know, the better we can prepare for what's coming. This isn't just Minnesota's story. It could be yours next. Number 1. Indiana. From a distance, Indiana looks like the very definition of Midwest stability. Red brick factories, humming rail yards, and towns built on industry and grit. It's a state known for being productive, reliable, and grounded. But in 2025, that image is beginning to fracture, quietly but unmistakably. Here's what few are saying out loud. Indiana is economically vulnerable. And it's not because of anything happening inside the state. It's because of something unraveling just across the northern border. Canada. Let's start with the basics. Canada is Indiana's single largest international trade partner, by a wide margin. Nearly $12 billion in goods move north each year. We're talking about auto parts, steel, medical components, pharmaceuticals, farm exports. Products that support tens of thousands of Hoosier jobs. But this year, that flow is slowing. And it's not a blip. It's the beginning of a serious pullback. The Canadian boycott isn't just a trending topic. It's a reality on the ground. Orders are being canceled. Export volumes are shrinking. And entire sectors of Indiana's economy are starting to feel the weight. Let's talk about manufacturing, the beating heart of Indiana. This isn't just a big sector here. Indiana is one of the most manufacturing-intensive states in the country. Nearly 1 in 5 workers is connected to it. From auto parts and medical devices to steel beams and aircraft components, factories here make things the world needs. And for years, a large slice of those products went to Canada. But in 2025, something changed. Companies in Ontario and Quebec are shifting orders elsewhere. Some to Europe, others to different U.S. states, and many to domestic Canadian suppliers. Why the shift? It's not just economics. It's also about trade tension, political friction, rising cross-border costs, and a growing nationalist push among Canadian consumers to buy Canadian. Whatever the reasons, the result is the same: less demand for Indiana-made goods. And here's what that looks like. Factories cutting shifts, machine shops reporting canceled orders, investment freezes in small towns like Elkhart, Muncie, and Terre Haute, and mid-sized suppliers being dropped from contracts they once considered bulletproof. Even a modest decline in export volume hits hard when entire communities rely on a single plant or industry. The numbers paint a clear picture. Indiana's exports to Canada dropped over 9% in Q1 of 2025. High-margin products are being replaced by lower-yield contracts. That means smaller paychecks, lower tax revenue, and tighter public budgets. And it's not just industry. Agriculture is feeling the squeeze too. Indiana is a major producer of corn, soybeans, pork. Canada is one of Indiana's top 5 foreign buyers of agricultural goods. But in 2025, those shipments are slowing. 2 grain cooperatives in central Indiana have already reported a noticeable drop in Canadian demand. Pork producers are scrambling, trying to reroute shipments to Mexico, but that brings higher costs and lower profits. Meanwhile, local leaders are growing concerned. Quietly, state officials are lobbying Ottawa and pushing for emergency trade outreach, but the reality is this: trust takes years to build and days to damage. And right now, trust between Indiana and Canada is strained. So what happens next? Indiana's economy is resilient, absolutely. But it's also highly specialized. That makes it efficient and fragile. When your biggest customer pulls back, even slightly, you feel it immediately. And right now, that customer is pulling back faster than ever. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's a realignment, one that could reshape Indiana's economy if it continues unchecked. If you want more deep dives like this, on stories the headlines are missing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because what's happening in Indiana today could be a preview of what's coming elsewhere tomorrow.